All right, let's jump right into an explainer that totally flips the script on how we build profound, enduring intimacy. Imagine a relationship where every single touch, every mundane, everyday interaction is carefully negotiated and strictly governed by a manual that the two of you wrote together. Now that sounds like a full-time job, right? But for a growing number of couples, turning off that comfortable, predictable autopilot of modern romance and adopting this highly rigid, intentional control is actually their secret weapon. It's how they preserve connection over the long haul. So today, we're unpacking a fascinating framework that completely transforms how we view domestic partnership.
You know the feeling, right? We all start with that highly relatable baseline, that inevitable moment the honeymoon phase just ends. When you first fall in love, your dopamine is firing on all cylinders. Every single interaction feels electric. But then, you move in together, routines settle in, and physical connection basically becomes as effortless, passive, and mundane as brushing your teeth next to each other every morning. It just becomes the default setting of your life, fading right into the background noise of paying bills and doing laundry.
So what's actually happening here? Well, it's a little psychological mechanism called the hedonic treadmill. When you have unlimited, unrestricted access to physical intimacy, your brain literally stops registering it as a high-value reward. The habituation just kicks in. It's the hedonic treadmill applied directly to romance. Because it's so easy, your brain completely stops appreciating it. It's like, why expend energy valuing something that is literally always there? And before you know it, you start taking your partner's presence and their touch entirely for granted. To see how to cure this, we're going to look at a literal blueprint for connection. We'll start with ending autopilot romance, check out the Belvedere philosophy, dive into intentional relationship design, explore restriction as mindfulness, identify the load-bearing wall of trust, and wrap up with building emotional abundance.
Section 1. Ending autopilot romance. Basically, dismantling that comfortable default setting.
Think about the classic 50-50 split. It represents the default egalitarian structure of a modern relationship, right? We're taught from day one that 50-50 is the ultimate goal, the absolute pinnacle of fairness. But the reality is, without extreme intention, this equal, unrestricted access often devolves into passively taking each other for granted. When nobody's actively driving the ship, the relationship just kind of drifts. The romance slowly fades into the background of a busy life, replaced by a comfortable but distinctly unexciting roommate dynamic.
Moving to Section 2, the Belvedere philosophy, where we completely redefine these dynamics.
This is where the paradigm shift really hits. When most of us hear about power dynamics, our brains instantly jump to a cliché aesthetic. Dark rooms, heavy padlocks, something purely taboo, secretive, or super intimidating. But the Belvedere of reality? It looks entirely different. It honestly looks like a high-end hospitality campaign for a five-star hotel in Milan. They deliberately use imagery of elegant tailoring, maroon dresses, and bright, sophisticated spaces to completely destigmatize the concept. They're presenting it as an elevated, highly dignified lifestyle choice rather than some hidden kink.
Actually, they describe the whole thing as a corporate merger between two highly successful people who just happen to be romantic partners. I mean, talk about a tone shift. By treating their relationship with this organized, almost corporate seriousness, they replace chaotic, fading romance with profound, structured intention. They aren't just leaving intimacy up to chance or exhaustion or whatever mood they're in. They're treating it with the unwavering seriousness of a massive corporate merger, fully recognizing that a lifetime partnership is literally the biggest investment either of them will ever make. Section 3, Intentional Relationship Design. Let's look at how they actually build this connection blueprint. So here's the Belvedere blueprint. Before a couple using this system ever touches the actual practices of power exchange, the literal framework forces them to walk through foundations and structure. Look, if you're going to dismantle a comfortable 50-50 dynamic and replace it with a formalized hierarchy, you absolutely cannot just wing it. You have to establish the why and the how way in advance. Both partners must align completely on this foundation to prevent resentment, guarantee clarity, and avoid any massive boundary violations down the road.
All right, Section 4, Restriction as Mindfulness. And this is a massive psychological hurdle.
We usually hear the word chastity and instinctively think punishment or some kind of weird barrier. But the Belvedere text explicitly redefines this pretty scary word into a remarkably powerful psychological tool. As they put it, it is not a denial, it is a consensual framework for mindfulness. By voluntarily taking the easiest, most practiced avenue of intimacy entirely off the table, you are literally forcing the brain to wake up and consciously seek out other routes for connection. It snaps you completely out of autopilot.
Think of this forcing function exactly like a voluntary dopamine detox or one of those intense fasting retreats.
You don't fast for 5 days because you hate food, right? You do it to entirely reset your baseline. You do it so that when you finally eat a plain bowl of rice, it tastes like a Michelin star meal. Stripping away that passive, expected physical routine forces extreme emotional presence. It makes the ordinary feel totally extraordinary again.
It's literally just basic economics applied to human psychology. When something is overwhelmingly abundant, its perceived value naturally plummets. By transforming touch from a passive, everyday expectation back into a restricted, highly anticipated special event, this artificial scarcity completely rewires the brain's reward center. The couple can't just rely on lazy cuddling on the couch while scrolling TikTok anymore. They have to actively communicate using their words, their dedicated time, and their deepest vulnerability.
Section 5, the load-bearing wall, because we really have to talk about preventing ego trips here.
Obviously, this raises a massive red flag. What stops someone holding the literal keys to the dynamic from turning into a toxic dictator? Well, alongside intense concepts like discipline and structure, the philosophy explicitly maps out these absolute non-negotiables: communication, emotional safety, mutual respect, and reassurance. The text is crystal clear. Control for the sake of ego is terrifying and entirely antithetical to their design. Healthy leadership here demands taking on the heavy emotional liability of a partner's vulnerability.
Notice that last concept specifically, reassurance. This is literally the load-bearing wall of the entire dynamic. It is the biological counteragent to fear. When someone completely relinquishes autonomy over their physical routines, it naturally triggers a massive vulnerability spike. Reassurance is the precise tool used to manage that exact spike, preventing the whole structure from just collapsing into pure anxiety.
Let's look at the biology for a second, because it's fascinating. The amygdala, our brain's threat detection center, naturally panics when control is lost. It's asking, am I safe? Is this person going to exploit me? The leading partner has to actively and continuously flood the dynamic with oxytocin through empathetic reassurance to calm that amygdala right down. If that reassurance is missing, the vulnerability instantly turns into fear. And if it turns into fear, you cross a hard line from continuous consent straight into abuse.
So being the architect of this dynamic, it is definitely not about passive dominance or just sitting back and being served. No way. It is absolutely exhausting, active work. The leading partner has to operate as both the CEO and the head of HR. They're constantly monitoring the emotional weather of the relationship, managing their own ego with ruthless discipline, and performing continuous emotional labor just to ensure their partner feels entirely safe and deeply valued.
Which brings us to Section 6, Building Emotional Abundance. Why on earth would anyone volunteer for this?
If this lifestyle requires the effort of a second full-time job, why do it? Well, for these couples, the alternative is just unacceptable. They look around and see the slow, quiet death of relationships by 1,000 unappreciated days. So they build this uncompromising fortress of rules, restrictions, and discipline specifically to cure the modern disease of treating intimacy casually. They simply refuse to let their profound connections slowly die out on autopilot.
And this single quote completely nails their entire philosophy. The work is the point. By demanding that every interaction be highly deliberate, they prove that power isn't a weapon you use against a partner. It's a vital structural tool the couple uses together against the inevitable decay of time, routine, and habituation. The continuous effort itself is what generates that intense connection.
So what's the real takeaway for the rest of us? Look, regardless of whether you have zero interest in female-led dynamics, chastity, or power exchanges, this is an absolute masterclass in intentional relationship design. It challenges all of us to prioritize emotional safety above all else, to require continuous consent, to ditch the passive consumption of our partners, and to actively, radically construct our own dynamics instead of just letting them passively happen to us.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. If voluntarily restricting a physical freedom can act as a powerful catalyst for extreme emotional presence, how could you apply that logic? What everyday conveniences, habits, or unrestricted access might you voluntarily pause in your own life to force yourself to be more intentionally present with the people you love? Take a hard look at how you manage your own connections. Because sometimes, introducing a little bit of intentional scarcity is exactly what we need to wake ourselves up and realize the true profound value of the people standing right in front of us.